She agreed to marry a monster to save her father from ruin. She prepared to bury her heart, convinced that the man she had loved since childhood, the powerful, brooding Duke of Ashworth, saw her only as a friend. But when the Duke discovers the disastrous courtship, he doesn't just object. He shatters societal norms to save her. Yet he has no idea that every look, every touch, and every rescue is torture for her, because she's been secretly in love with him for a decade. This is the story of a salvation that almost became a tragedy. London, April 1842. The air in the library of Kenshire House smelled of stale cigar smoke and impending ruin. Lady Callista Vane sat rigid in the high-backed velvet chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests. Across from her, Lord Reginald Crowe swirled a glass of brandy, his eyes roaming over her with a possessive glint that made her skin crawl. Crowe was a man of 50, with a face that looked as though it had been carved from cold dough. He was wealthy, influential in the House of Lords, and rumoured to have driven his first wife to an early grave through sheer cruelty. "It is a simple equation, really, my dear Callista," Crowe said, his voice like grinding stones. He tossed a stack of promissory notes onto the mahogany desk between them. "Your father, the Earl, has a penchant for faro. A dangerous habit. These notes represent a sum that would see him not just destitute, but imprisoned in Fleet Prison before the season is out." Callista looked at the papers. The handwriting was unmistakably her father's, shaky, desperate. The sum was astronomical. "My father is ill," Callista whispered, her throat tight. He was not in his right mind when he signed these. And yet the law cares little for the state of a man's mind when the ink is dry. Crowe countered, leaning forward. The scent of heavy musk and brandy assaulted her senses. "However, I am a reasonable man. I am in need of a wife. A young, fertile wife with a reputable lineage to breed an heir. You, Lady Callista, are perfect." Callista felt the bile rise. She was 22, considered a beauty by the ton, with her dark chestnut hair and eyes the colour of storm clouds. But she had turned down 3 proposals this season. Not out of vanity, but out of a secret, aching loyalty to a man who barely noticed she was a woman. "If I agree," she asked, her voice trembling. "I burn the notes. Your father retains his estate, his title and his dignity. You become Lady Crowe. You will have jewels, dresses, and my discipline." The threat hung heavy in the air. "And if I refuse, I call in the debt tomorrow morning. The scandal will destroy the Vane name. Your father will die in a cell." Callista closed her eyes. An image flashed in her mind, not of her father, but of him. Stellan St. Clair, the Duke of Ashworth. He was currently in Vienna on diplomatic business. He had been her brother's best friend before her brother died in the war. Stellan had promised to look after the Vane family. If she told Stellan, he would pay the debt. She knew he would. But that was the problem. The Vanes had already taken so much from the St. Clairs. Stellan had already bailed her father out twice before. To ask him again to burden him with this colossal failure would sever the last thread of respect he held for her family. She could not bear to see the look of disappointment in his steel-blue eyes. She would rather sell her soul to Crowe than see Stellan look at her with pity and disdain. "I need time," she breathed. "You have until the Rothschild ball on Friday," Crowe said, standing up and draining his glass. He walked over to her, his hand brushing against her neck. She flinched. Wear the red silk. I like it when my possessions are displayed properly. When he finally left, the silence of the library crashed down on her. Callista rushed to the window, gasping for air. The London fog pressed against the glass, grey and suffocating. She walked to the fireplace where a small portrait sat on the mantel. It was a miniature of Stellan. High cheekbones, a jaw set in perpetual stoicism, and eyes that held a hidden warmth she had only seen on rare occasions. "I love you," she whispered to the painted image, the secret she had kept since she was 12 years old, burning her tongue. "I love you enough to let you stay free of us." She had accepted her fate. She would marry Crow. She would save her father. And she would never, ever let Stellan know she had done it for him. 3 days later. The Rothschild ball was the apex of the season. The chandeliers of the grand ballroom cast a kaleidoscope of light over the diamond-studded crowd. The orchestra played a waltz, but to Callista it sounded like a funeral dirge. She wore the red silk just as Crow had commanded. It was cut lower than she liked, exposing the slope of her shoulders. She felt exposed a prize heifer at an auction. Crow was gripping her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh, leaving bruises that would bloom by morning. He was parading her. "Smile, my dear," he hissed in her ear. "You look miserable. It insults me." Callista forced the corners of her mouth up. "I am merely overwhelmed, Lord Crow. You will learn to manage your emotions, or I will manage them for you." They were standing near the periphery of the dance floor when the murmurs started. It began as a ripple near the entrance, a hush that spread like a wave across the room. The music didn't stop, but the crowd parted. Callista looked up, and her heart stopped dead in her chest. Standing at the top of the marble staircase was Stellan St. Clair. He was back. He looked more imposing than she remembered. He wore stark black formal wear, the Star of the Garter pinned to his chest. His dark hair was slightly longer, windswept from travel, and his face was tanned from the continental sun. But his expression was thunderous. He wasn't looking at the host. He wasn't looking at the debutantes swooning in his wake. He was scanning the room with the precision of a predator. His eyes locked onto hers. For a second, the world fell away. Callista felt a rush of pure, unadulterated joy, followed immediately by crushing terror. He cannot know. Stellan descended the stairs, moving with a lethal grace that made men step out of his path. He ignored the greetings of earls and countesses. He walked straight toward Callista and Crow. "St. Clair," Crow said, his voice oily, but laced with a hint of nervousness. "We did not expect you back from Vienna so soon." Stellan didn't even look at Crow. His gaze was fixed entirely on Callista. He took in the red dress, the pallor of her skin, and finally Crow's hand gripping her arm. "Callista," Stellan said. His voice was deep, vibrating through the floorboards. "You look distressed." "I am quite well, Your Grace," she lied, dipping into a curtsy. She couldn't meet his eyes. "Lord Crow and I were just discussing the music." "Is that so?" Stellan's gaze flicked to Crow's hand. "Release her, Crow. You are bruising the lady." Crow chuckled, though the sound lacked humor. "She is delicate, and soon she will be mine to hold as I please. We are to be engaged this evening." The air temperature between the three of them dropped 10 degrees. Stellan went very still. It was the stillness of a tiger before the pounce. "Engaged." "Indeed." Crow puffed his chest out. "I have made her father a generous offer to settle his affairs. Callista has graciously accepted." Stellan looked at Callista. "Is this true? You wish to marry this man?" Say yes, her mind screamed. Say yes and save your father. Say yes and protect Stellan from the mess. It is a sensible match, Callister managed to choke out. Lord Crow is very generous. Stellan laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. Generous. Reginald Crow is a leech who preys on the desperate. Now see here, Ashworth, Crow blustered. Quiet, Stellan snapped, not raising his voice yet, commanding absolute silence. He stepped closer to Callister, invading her personal space. She could smell him now, sandalwood rain and the faint scent of old books. It was the smell of safety. Callister, look at me. She looked up. His blue eyes were blazing with an emotion she couldn't place. Anger, betrayal. Did you ask for my counsel on this? He asked softly. I did not think it necessary. You are under my protection. You have been since the day your brother died. Did you think I would let you sell yourself to a man who has buried 2 wives? It is my choice, Stellan, she cried out, the use of his Christian name slipping out in her distress. Please, just leave it be. No, Stellan turned to Crow. The engagement is off. Crow's face turned purple. You have no right. Her father has agreed the contracts. I bought them, Stellan said calmly. Callister gasped. Crow froze. Excuse me, Crow sputtered. Your solicitor is a chatty man when enough coin is placed on the table, Stellan said, adjusting his cuffs. I arrived in London this morning. I went straight to the clubs. I heard the rumours of Kenshire's debts. I went to your man, bought every single note of debt Harry Vane owes you, plus 20% for your trouble. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the stack of notes, the very same ones Crow had threatened Callister with, and held them up. You... Crow was shaking with rage. This is robbery. This is business, Stellan corrected. Earl Kenshire now owes me the money, which means he owes you nothing, which means Lady Callister is under no obligation to marry you. He ripped the notes in half, then in half again. He tossed the confetti-like pieces at Crow's feet. Get out of my sight, Crow. If you ever touch her again, I will challenge you. And I am a much better shot than you are. Crow looked at the shredded paper, then at the Duke's towering form. He knew he was beaten. With a sneer directed at Callister, You're not worth the trouble anyway, you little tart. He turned and disappeared into the crowd. Callister stood trembling, staring at the paper on the floor. Her father was saved. The nightmare was over. But a new one was beginning. She now owed everything to Stellan. Come, Stellan said, his voice brooking no argument. He offered her his arm. We are leaving. Stellan, I saw, not here. He cut her off, his jaw tight. We will speak in the carriage, and you will explain to me why you thought sacrificing your life was a suitable solution to a gambling debt. She took his arm. It was hard as granite. As they walked out of the ballroom, every eye fixed on them. Callister realized the truth. He had saved her from the fire, but now she was walking straight into the flame of her own heart. Being indebted to him, being close to him, while knowing he did it out of duty and not love, would break her faster than Crow ever could. The carriage ride was a suffocating ordeal of silence and shadow. The clatter of horses' hooves on the cobblestones was the only sound breaking the thick tension. Callister sat pressed against the squabs, shivering not from cold, but from the radiating heat of Stellan's fury sitting opposite her. He hadn't looked at her since handing her into the carriage. He stared out the window, his profile illuminated intermittently by passing gas lamps. His jaw was so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. Say something, she finally whispered, unable to bear the quiet. Stellan turned slowly. In the dim light, his eyes were pools of turbulent darkness. What would you have me say? Callista. Shall I congratulate you on your martyrdom? Shall I applaud your willingness to whore yourself to a monster for the sake of your father's vices? The word hung in the air, ugly and brutal. Callista flinched as if struck. That is cruel, Stellan. Cruel. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. You have no conception of cruelty if you think what I just did is comparable to a lifetime with Reginald Crowe. Do you know what he does to women? Do you know the depravities he is rumoured to practice? I did what I had to do, she cried, tears finally spilling over. My father was going to prison. We were going to be ruined. You were in Vienna. What choice did I have? You had me. He struck the carriage wall with the flat of his hand, making her jump. You always have me. Did I not promise Arthur on his deathbed that I would protect you? Did you think my word so hollow that I would abandon you to this? I didn't want to be another burden on you. The truth tore out of her throat before she could stop it. You have already saved us twice. How could I ask again? How could I stand before you a beggar yet again, and see the respect in your eyes turn to pity? I would rather die than have your pity. Stellan froze, the anger drained from his face, replaced by stark confusion. My pity, Callista, you are Arthur's sister. You are family. Family. The word was a dagger to her heart. Of course, that's all she was, the little sister he had inherited. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing deeply. The fight seemed to leave him. You are not a burden. You never have been. But you are recklessly foolish. You have no idea the danger you put yourself in tonight. He sat back, watching her intently. The scene I caused at the ball. It will be the talk of London by breakfast. Crowe will spread poison. Your reputation is currently hanging by a thread. If you return to your father's house now, the vultures will descend. Callista wiped her tears away, trying to regain composure. Then what do I do? I have nowhere else to go. Stellan looked at her for a long moment, a strange calculation in his eyes. He seemed to be wrestling with an internal decision. You will come with me, he said finally. To Kent, to Ashworth Manor. Callista's breath caught. Stellan, I cannot. It is improper. An unmarried woman staying alone at a bachelor's estate. You will be heavily chaperoned. My aunt, Lady Agatha, lives at the dower house on the estate. She will move into the main manor. It will be perfectly respectable. His tone hardened. I am not giving you a choice, Callista. Until the gossip dies down and I can ensure Crowe is thoroughly neutralized, you are under my roof where I can see you. He leaned back into the shadows again. You wanted to save your father. Fine. He is saved. Now I must save you from the wreckage you almost made of your life. Callista looked out the window as the carriage rattled on, leaving the lights of London behind for the dark roads leading to Kent. She was going to live in his house. She would see him every day at breakfast, sit across from him at dinner, breathe the same air. He thought he was protecting her from scandal. He had no idea he was locking her in a cage with the one thing that could truly destroy her, her hopeless, unrequited love for him. Ashworth Manor was a sprawling beast of grey stone centuries older than the frivolous pastel drawing rooms of London. It was imposing, severe, and undeniably magnificent, much like its master. For the first week, Callista barely saw Stellan. He buried himself in estate management, riding out before she woke and returning only for a silent, formal dinner. Lady Agatha, a formidable woman, with a surprisingly warm heart, acted as a buffer, filling the silences with chatter about gardening and local vicarage gossip. But the size of the manor couldn't keep them apart forever. One rainy afternoon, Callista escaped Agatha's needlepoint rambling and sought refuge in the library. It was a colossal room 2 stories high, smelling of old leather and beeswax. She climbed the spiral staircase to the upper gallery, pulling a volume of Voltaire from a high shelf. She didn't hear him enter below. She only realized he was there when the scent of rain and sandalwood drifted up to her. She looked down through the wrought-iron railing. Stellan was standing at his desk, stripping off his wet riding coat. His shirt was damp, clinging to the broad muscles of his back. Her breath hitched. She should announce herself. She should look away. She did neither. She watched him mesmerized by the raw masculinity he hid beneath tailored suits in London. He turned suddenly, his instincts sharp, and looked up. His eyes locked onto hers through the railings. "Callista!" His voice was rough. "Your Grace," she managed, clutching the book to her chest like a shield. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just looking for something to read." "Voltaire." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement crossing his stern features. "Light reading for a debutante." "I'm not merely a debutante, Stellan. I do have a brain." He stared at her for a beat too long. "Yes, I suppose you do. Arthur always said you were the clever one." He walked toward the stairs, looking up at her. The distance felt charged. "Come down. You look like a bird trapped in the rafters up there." She descended slowly, painfully aware of his gaze on her descent. When she reached the bottom floor, he was standing closer than she expected. "Are you bored here?" he asked. It was the first personal question he'd asked her since they arrived. "It is quiet," she admitted, "but peaceful. Better than London. Better than Crow." She flinched. "Yes. Thank you. I have not thanked you properly yet." "Don't," he said sharply. He turned away, walking to the fireplace. "I don't want your gratitude. I want your safety." He seemed agitated, restless. He paced the length of the hearth. "I never realized," he muttered almost to himself. "Realized what?" He stopped and looked at her. Really looked at her. Not as Arthur's little sister, but as the woman standing in his library, clutching Voltaire with eyes the color of a bruised sky. "How grown up you are," he said softly. The admission seemed to surprise him. "I still pictured you with braids chasing Arthur and me down by the river. But you are not that girl anymore, are you?" Callista's heart hammered against her ribs. "No, Stellan. I haven't been that girl for a very long time." The air thickened between them. A strange new tension thrummed in the silence, different from his anger in the carriage. This felt dangerous in an entirely different way. He took a step toward her, his eyes dropping to her mouth for a fleeting second before he seemed to catch himself. He abruptly turned back to his desk. "Dinner is at 8. Don't be late." Callista fled the library, her pulse racing. He had seen her. For 1 second, he had truly seen her, and the look in his eyes hadn't been brotherly at all. 2 weeks turned into a month. The forced proximity was an exquisite form of torture. Stellan was no longer distant. He was present, intensely so. They rode together in the mornings, the autumn wind whipping their horses into a frenzy. They debated politics over dinner, Stellan challenging her intellect in ways no man ever had. He laughed at her dry wit, a rich, resonant sound that made her knees weak. Callista was falling deeper in love with every passing hour, and she was terrified. She saw the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. She felt the electricity that crackled when his hand accidentally brushed hers while passing a teacup. He was feeling it too. She knew it. He was growing more possessive, his gaze darker, his moods mercurial. He was a man fighting a war with himself. The breaking point came during the worst storm Kent had seen in years. Thunder shook the foundations of the manor, and lightning turned the night sky into a strobe light of blinding white flashing against black. Callista couldn't sleep. The storm unsettled her. Wrapped in a heavy silk dressing gown, she went down to the kitchens to find warm milk. On her way back up, she passed the small private study Stellan used late at night. The door was ajar. Firelight flickered from within. She pushed the door open slightly. Stellan was slumped in an armchair, a half-empty decanter of whiskey on the table beside him. He was staring into the flames, looking utterly desolate. "Stellan." He jerked his head up. His eyes were bleary. His cravat loosened his hair, disheveled. He looked wild. "Callista, you should be in bed." His voice was thick with drink and something else. Something raw. "I couldn't sleep because of the storm." "Are you all right?" She stepped inside, closing the door against the thunder. "No." He laughed bitterly. "I'm not all right." He stood up, swaying slightly. He looked at her, clad only in her night rail and wrapper, her hair tumbling loose around her shoulders. The intensity of his gaze was almost physical. "Why did you come down here, Callista?" he whispered, walking toward her. He didn't stop until he was looming over her, trapping her between his body and the door. "I was worried about you." "Worried?" He reached out his fingers, tracing the line of her jaw, his touch scorching her skin. "You are the most maddening creature I have ever known. You have turned my house and my mind completely upside down." "I will leave tomorrow if you wish," she breathed, unable to move. "Leave." His hand moved to the nape of her neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin there. His eyes burned into hers. "God help me. That is the last thing I want." A crash of thunder overhead coincided with him crushing his mouth to hers. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a starving man, finally reaching a feast. It was desperate, angry, and overwhelmingly passionate. Callista gasped against his mouth, and he used the opportunity to deepen the kiss, his tongue tangling with hers. She melted into him. 10 years of longing poured out of her. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, meeting his fire with her own. For a few glorious seconds, nothing existed but the taste of whiskey and Stellan on her tongue, the feel of his hard body pressed against her softness. Then, just as abruptly as it began, he tore himself away. He stumbled back, bracing his hands on his desk, breathing hard as if he'd run a mile. He wouldn't look at her. "Get out," he choked out. Callista stood, trembling. Her lips swollen, her body humming. "Stellan, get out, Callista." He slammed his fist onto the desk, making the whiskey glasses rattle. "Go to your room, lock the door, and do not come out until morning." Tears blinded her as she fled the room. She didn't understand. He had kissed her like he wanted to devour her, and then rejected her with a violence that shattered her heart. Down in the study, Stellan poured another glass of whiskey with shaking hands. He stared at the door she had just left through. He had broken his promise to Arthur. He had dishonored his best friend's sister under his own roof. He wanted her more than he had ever wanted anything in his life. The realization terrified him. He was a man of duty, of control. Around Callista he had neither. She was a wildfire, threatening to burn down the carefully constructed fortress of his life. If he touched her again, he wouldn't be able to stop. He would ruin her completely. He had to protect her from himself. He sat at his desk, pulled out a piece of parchment, and dipped his quill in ink. His hand shook, but his resolve hardened. There was only one way to fix this, one way to ensure her safety and rebuild the barrier between them that he had just so recklessly smashed. He began to write an invitation. The morning sun that flooded the breakfast room felt mocking in its brightness. Callista sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at her untouched toast. The memory of the previous night, the storm, the whiskey. The way Stellan's mouth had devoured hers played on a loop in her mind. She expected him to be awkward. She expected an apology. She did not expect the man who walked through the double doors at 8:00 a.m. sharp. Stellan was dressed immaculately in a riding coat of hunter green. His hair was perfectly slicked back, his demeanor made of ice. There was no trace of the wild, desperate man who had pinned her against the desk. "Good morning, Callista," he said, not looking up from the correspondence pile on the sideboard. His voice was flat, professional. "Stellan," she croaked. She cleared her throat. "About last night. Last night was an error." He cut her off, turning to face her with a chilling detachment. "I had taken too much drink. The storm was unsettling. I took liberties I should not have taken. It will not happen again." The apology was technically correct, but the delivery felt like a slap. "An error, a lapse in judgment," he corrected. "One I have already taken steps to rectify. It is clear that the isolation of Ashworth Manor is unhealthy for both of us. We dwell too much on the past." He tossed a letter onto the table. "I have invited guests, a small house party. They arrive within the week." Callista felt a cold dread pool in her stomach. "Guests who? Lord and Lady Stirling, the Viscount of Oakhaven, and Lady Rosalind Wickham, along with her mother." Callista stopped breathing. Lady Rosalind Wickham was the diamond of the season 2 years running. Blonde, statuesque, impeccably mannered, and possessing a dowry that could buy a small country. She was everything Callista was not: calm, predictable, and safe. She was also the woman the tabloids had been predicting Stellan would marry for years. "I see," Callista whispered. "You are courting her." Stellan's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained cold. "It is time I settled down. I need a duchess. Rosalind is suitable." Suitable. The word was a wall being built between them brick by brick. "And what of me?" Callista asked, her voice trembling. "Am I to watch you court another woman in the house you forced me to live in? You are here for your protection, Callista, until Crow is dealt with. Rosalind's presence will actually help your reputation. It will look like you are simply part of a festive gathering, rather than a spinster in hiding." He checked his pocket watch. "I have estate business. Excuse me." He walked out, leaving Callista alone with the ruins of her hope. He was bringing a shield into the house. He was bringing a wife. And he was doing it specifically to prove to Callista and to himself that the kiss meant nothing. 3 days later, the peace of the manor was shattered by the arrival of 4 carriages. Servants scurried like ants. Trunks were hauled up the stairs. Lady Rosalind was exactly as beautiful as Callista feared. She drifted into the foyer like a cloud of pale pink muslin. her golden curls perfect even after a long journey. "Your Grace," Rosalind cooed, extending a gloved hand. Stellan took it and bowed low, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that lingered a fraction of a second too long. Callista, watching from the top of the stairs, felt physically sick. "Lady Rosalind," Stellan said, his voice dropping into a charm Callista rarely heard, "you grace my home with your presence." For the next 10 days, Callista lived in a special kind of hell. She watched them ride together. Rosalind's laughter tinkling like glass bells across the lawn. She watched them at dinner, Stellan leaning in to whisper things that made Rosalind blush. Stellan was putting on a performance. He was the perfect attentive suitor. But every now and then, when Rosalind looked away, Callista would catch Stellan staring across the table at her. His eyes were dark, tormented, burning with a jealousy he had no right to feel whenever the young Viscount Oakhaven tried to engage Callista in conversation. The tension came to a head on the night of the masquerade ball Stellan threw for the county. Callista wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, dark and dramatic. She wore a simple black mask. She retreated to the terrace, unable to watch Stellan dance the waltz with Rosalind. The night air was cool. She leaned against the stone balustrade, fighting tears. "You look like a tragic queen," a voice said from the shadows. She turned. It was Stellan. He wasn't wearing his mask. He held a glass of champagne, his knuckles white around the stem. "Go back to your future wife, Stellan," she snapped, turning away. "She is not my wife yet. She will be. Everyone knows it. You are perfect for each other. Both so. Cold." Stellan made a noise in his throat, a growl of frustration. He set the glass down on the stone rail with a sharp clink. "Is that what you think I am? Cold. You kissed me," she hissed, spinning around to face him. "You kissed me like you were dying, and then you called it an error and invited her here to replace me. What is that if not cold? It is honor." Stellan stepped closer, his scent of sandalwood enveloping her. "I cannot have you, Callista. I promised Arthur. You are his sister. You deserve a man with a whole heart, not a man who has been hollowed out by duty and war. I am trying to do the right thing." "To hell with the right thing," Callista cried. "And to hell with Arthur. He is dead. Stellan, we are alive. Do you think he would want us to be miserable? I am not miserable." He lied, though his voice shook. "You are a liar." She stepped into his space, her hand coming up to touch his chest. She could feel his heart hammering against her palm, betraying him. "Tell me you feel nothing for me. Look me in the eye and tell me that when you kiss her you don't wish it was me." Stellan stared down at her. His mask of control was cracking, his hand raised, hovering near her cheek. "Callista!" Suddenly, a scream shattered the night. It came from the front of the manor. A servant's scream. Stellan's instincts took over instantly. The softness vanished from his eyes, replaced by the steel of a soldier. He grabbed Callista's arm. "Stay here," he ordered. "Do not move." He ran toward the French doors. Callista waited for a heartbeat, then hiked up her skirts and followed him. The Ashworth Masquerade Ball was a spectacle of gold leaf and velvet, a shimmering mirage designed to hide the cracks in the foundation of the Duke's life. 300 guests filled the grand ballroom, their faces obscured by masks of silk and papier-mâché, moving in a swirling kaleidoscope of color to the strains of a Viennese waltz. To Lady Callista Vane, it looked like a funeral procession. She stood on the periphery of the dance floor, shrouded in a gown of midnight blue velvet that swallowed the light. A simple black domino mask hid the swelling around her eyes, the evidence of tears shed in the privacy of her chambers. In the center of the room, under the blaze of the crystal chandelier, Stellan danced with Lady Rosalind. They were a vision of perfection. Rosalind, in pale pink, looked like a sugar confection, her golden curls bouncing as she laughed at something Stellan whispered. Stellan was devastatingly handsome in his formal blacks, his movements precise, commanding, and utterly detached. To the watching world, he was a man enchanted. To Callista, who knew the cadence of his breathing and the tension in his jaw, he looked like a man marching to the gallows. Unable to bear the sight of his hand resting on Rosalind's waist, the same hand that had held her face with such desperation during the storm, Callista turned and fled. She slipped through the French doors and out onto the stone terrace. The night air was crisp, biting at her exposed skin. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving the gardens below in a pool of ink. Callista gripped the cold stone balustrade, inhaling the scent of damp earth and dying leaves, trying to steady her erratic heart. "You should not be out here without a wrap," a deep voice rumbled from the shadows. Callista stiffened, but didn't turn. She knew that voice better than her own heartbeat. "And you should be inside proposing to the perfect Lady Rosalind." Leather boots crunched softly on the stone as Stellan approached. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, yet far enough to maintain the chasm of propriety he had built between them. "I have not proposed," he said, his voice weary. He removed his mask, revealing eyes that were dark and tormented. "But you will," Callista said, finally turning to face him. "Tonight. Everyone expects it. She expects it. It is necessary, Callista. We have discussed this." "No, you discussed it. You dictated it." Her voice rose, cracking with emotion. "You decided that my feelings, my heart, are inconveniences to be managed. You treat me like a problem to be solved, Stellan, not a woman. I treat you like the sister of the man I loved, like a brother." Stellan snapped, his composure fracturing. He slammed his hand onto the stone rail. "Do you think this is easy for me? Do you think I enjoy watching Oakhaven stare at your décolletage? Do you think I enjoy dancing with Rosalind when all I can smell is your perfume on my own skin?" "Then stop." Callista stepped into his space, grabbing the lapels of his coat. "Stop being the Duke. Stop being the Guardian. Just be Stellan. If Arthur were here, do you truly believe he would want us to be miserable? Do you think his ghost demands you marry a stranger to prove a point?" Stellan stared down at her, his chest heaving. The conflict in his eyes was a physical war. His hands came up, hovering over her waist, trembling. "Callista, you don't understand. I am darkness. I have been since the war. You are light. If I take you, I will extinguish you." "I am not a candle, Stellan. I am a fire, and I am burning for you." She saw the resolve shatter in his eyes. He let out a low, guttural groan and dipped his head. His forehead rested against hers, his breath mingling with hers. "God help me," he whispered. "I cannot breathe without you." He tilted his head, his lips mere inches from hers. The air between them crackled with electricity, the promise of a surrender that would ruin them both and save them simultaneously. Crash! The sound was not thunder. It was the shattering of glass, massive, violent, and echoing. It came from the ballroom. Stellan's head snapped up instantly. The lover vanished. The soldier returned. He pushed Callista behind him, his body becoming a human shield. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice low and lethal. "Stellan, do not move." He drew a small, heavy pistol from inside his dress coat, a weapon she hadn't even known he was carrying, and moved toward the French doors. Callista waited a heartbeat, terror gripping her throat, before hiking up her velvet skirts and following him. The scene inside was a tableau of nightmares. The music had died. The guests were screaming, a chaotic wave of silk and jewels pressing back against the far walls. In the center of the room, amidst the shards of a broken terrace door, stood 5 men. They were not gentlemen. They were filth-rough, scarred men from the rookeries wielding heavy clubs and rusted pistols. And in the center of them, looking like a spectre raised from hell, was Lord Reginald Crowe. He was unrecognizable from the arrogant lord of the season. His cravat was missing his shirt, stained with wine and mud, his eyes bloodshot and manic. He held a long-barreled dueling pistol in one hand and a bottle of spirits in the other. "Where is she?" Crowe screamed, his voice shredding the terrified silence. "Bring me the girl, or I start painting the walls with blue blood." Stellan stepped through the terrace doors, his own pistol lowered but ready. "Crowe," he said, his voice calm, projecting across the cavernous room. "Put the weapon down. There is no way out of this." Crowe spun around, his eyes locking onto the Duke. A twisted smile broke across his face. "Ah, the savior, the great Ashworth. You took my money. You took my reputation. You made me a laughing stock in my own club. You did that to yourself," Stellan countered, moving slowly to the right, drawing Crowe's attention away from the huddled guests. "You are a cheat and a bully, Reginald, and now it seems you are a housebreaker." "I am a man collecting a debt," Crowe roared. He fired a shot into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Lady Rosalind screamed and fainted into the arms of a nearby viscount. "The vain girl. She was the price. I want what I bought." "She is gone," Stellan lied smoothly. "I sent her away days ago." Crowe's eyes narrowed. "Liar. I saw her. On the terrace, with you." Crowe's gaze flicked past Stellan to the shadows of the French doors. He saw the glimmer of blue velvet. "There," Crowe pointed. "Get her." 2 of the hired thugs lunged toward the terrace. "Callista, run!" Stellan shouted. He raised his pistol and fired. The shot took the first thug in the knee. The man went down with a howl. Stellan didn't hesitate. He used the heavy pistol as a club, smashing it into the face of the second attacker with a sickening crunch of bone. But the chaos had begun. The guests stampeded. In the confusion, Crowe moved with the desperate agility of a rat. He didn't go for Stellan. He went for the prize. Callista had tried to run back into the house to find a weapon, but Crowe cut her off near the grand staircase. He grabbed a handful of her hair, yanking her back so hard she lost her footing. "Got you, you little witch!" Crowe hissed, the smell of stale gin overwhelming her. "Let me go!" Callista screamed, clawing at his face. Her nails raked down his cheek, drawing blood. Crowe roared in pain and backhanded her. The force of the blow sent her sprawling onto the stairs. Before she could recover, he hauled her up, jamming the barrel of his pistol against her temple. "Stop!" Crowe shrieked. "Stop or she dies!" The room froze. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Stellan stood 10 paces away. He was breathing hard, his knuckles white, as he gripped the empty pistol by the barrel. He looked at Callista, at the bruise already blooming on her cheek, at the terror in her eyes. And for the first time in his life, the Duke of Ashworth knew true fear. "Drop the gun, Ashworth," Crow panted, dragging Callista backward up the stairs. "Kick it away." Stellan slowly bent his knees, placing the weapon on the floor. He slid it across the marble. "It's done, Crow. You have me. Let her go." "You—" Crow laughed a jagged, broken sound. "You're too big to control. No, the girl is my passage. We are leaving. She's coming with me, as insurance." "You will never get out of England," Stellan said, his voice straining with suppressed rage. "I don't need to get out of England. I just need to get out of here. And if anyone follows us, I blow her pretty little head off." Crow continued to back up the stairs, dragging Callista with him. They reached the upper gallery, a narrow balcony that overlooked the marble foyer below. The drop was 20 feet enough to kill. Stellan watched them move. His mind was racing, calculating angles, distances, velocities. He had no weapon. The thugs were groaning on the floor, but Crow still had the high ground and a loaded gun pressed to the woman he loved. "Don't do this, Reginald," Stellan said, taking a slow step toward the stairs. "Think. If you hurt her, there is no corner of the earth where you can hide from me. I will not send the law. I will come myself. Stay back." Crow panicked, backing up until he hit the railing of the balcony. He was shaking. His finger twitched on the trigger. Callista looked down at Stellan. From this height he looked smaller, but his eyes were locked on hers with an intensity that anchored her soul. She saw him shift his weight. She saw his hand move imperceptibly toward his riding boot. He wasn't unarmed. He always carried a holdout, a derringer in his boot. But the shot was impossible. 30 feet, upward angle, a moving target shielding himself with her body. If he missed by an inch, he would kill her. Stellan's eyes signaled a silent command. "Trust me." Callista took a breath. She stopped struggling. She went limp in Crow's grip, making herself dead weight. "What the devil?" Crow grunted, struggling to hold her up. "Now, Callista," Stellan roared. "Drop!" Callista threw her weight forward and down, collapsing towards the floorboards of the balcony. Crow was left exposed for a fraction of a second. In one fluid motion, Stellan dropped to one knee, pulled the small pistol from his boot, and fired. The crack of the gunshot was sharp and singular. Time seemed to suspend. Crow's head snapped back. A bloom of red appeared on his shoulder, shattering the clavicle. The impact spun him around. He screamed, dropping his gun, flailing for balance against the low railing. But his center of gravity was gone. He tipped backward over the edge. He fell in silence, his eyes wide with shock, until he hit the marble floor below with a sickening final thud. The ballroom was dead silent. "Callista!" Stellan's voice tore from his throat, raw and terrified. On the balcony, a figure stirred. Callista pulled herself up by the railing, pale and shaking, peering over the edge. "I'm here," she sobbed. "I'm here." Stellan didn't use the stairs. He vaulted over the debris, taking the steps 3 at a time, moving with a speed that defied his size. He reached the gallery and fell to his knees, sliding across the floor to reach her. He grabbed her, pulling her into his arms with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his hands gripping her hair, her back, her arms checking for injuries, assuring himself of her reality. "I thought I killed you." He choked out his body, shuddering with the aftershocks of adrenaline. "God, Callista, I thought I missed." "You never miss," she whispered, clinging to him, her tears soaking his shirt. Below them, the shock was wearing off. Servants were rushing to Crow's body. Guests were murmuring, pointing up at the Duke, and the scandalous, dishevelled vain girl clinging to each other on the floor. Stellan pulled back, framing her face in his large, trembling hands. He looked at the bruise on her cheek, and a dark fury passed through his eyes, followed immediately by a wave of overwhelming tenderness. "I love you," he said. He didn't whisper it. He said it loud enough for the echo to carry down to the silent ballroom. "I have loved you since the day you turned 18. He continued, his thumb wiping a smudge of gunpowder from her jaw. "I tried to be noble. I tried to honor a promise to a ghost instead of honoring the woman standing in front of me. I was a fool. A blind, stubborn fool. Stellan, no, listen to me. I don't care about the scandal. I don't care about the debt or the ton or Lady Rosalind. I would burn this entire manor to the ground before I let anyone touch you again." He looked deep into her eyes, stripping away the last of his defenses. "Marry me, Callista. Not to save your reputation, not to save your father. Marry me because I cannot live another day in a world where you do not belong to me." Callista laughed through her sobs, a sound of pure release. "You possessive, arrogant man," she whispered, leaning her forehead against his. "I have belonged to you since I was 12 years old." Stellan let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a polite kiss. It was acclaiming. It was a searing seal of ownership and devotion, witnessed by half the peerage of England. It was the kiss of a man who had walked through hell and finally found the light. Below them, Lady Rosalind watched, holding her smelling salts. She looked at the dead villain on the floor, then up at the Duke, kissing the woman in the torn velvet dress. She sighed, snapped her fan shut, and turned to her mother. "Well," Rosalind said dryly, "I suppose I shall have to marry the Viscount after all. The Duke is clearly occupied." 6 months later. The morning light in the Ashworth breakfast room was soft and golden. The table was laden with pastries, fruit, and the morning papers. Stellan sat at the head of the table reading the Times, or rather, pretending to. Over the top of the paper, he was watching his wife. Callista was currently trying to feed a piece of bacon to a scruffy, three-legged dog that had wandered onto the estate a week prior, a dog she had insisted on keeping despite the butler's protests. "You are going to ruin the rugs," Stellan noted, though there was zero authority in his voice. "Barnaby is a delicate soul," Callista replied, scratching the mutt behind the ears. "He needs sustenance." She looked up, her eyes bright and mischievous. The shadows of that terrible night had faded, replaced by a vibrancy that filled the drafty old manor with life. "There is a letter from my father," she said, tapping a parchment on the table. "He is in Bath. He says the waters are good for his gout, and he has sworn off cards." "For this week at least," Stellan murmured, folding his paper. "He asks if we plan to visit. Perhaps in the spring." Stellan stood up and walked around the table. He came to stand behind her chair, wrapping his arms around her shoulders and burying his face in her hair. She smelled of lavender and toast. "Crow's ship docked in New South Wales yesterday," Stellan said quietly. "My solicitor received the confirmation." Callista stiffened slightly, then relaxed into his touch. "It is over, then. Truly. He will never hurt you again." He kissed the sensitive spot behind her ear. "And neither will I." Callista turned in her chair, looking up at him. "You saved me, Stellan. You know that." "No," he corrected, gently pulling her to her feet and holding her close against his heart. "You saved me, Callista. I was a man, trapped in a fortress of my own making. You were the only one brave enough to storm the walls." He kissed her slow and deep, the morning sun warming their backs. Outside, the world continued to turn. Scandals brewed, politics shifted, and seasons changed. But inside the walls of Ashworth Manor, the Duke and his Duchess had found the only thing that mattered. A love that had survived the fire and was now finally free to burn. In the end, it wasn't the pistol that saved them, nor the money that paid the debt. It was the truth. Stellan and Callista spent years building walls of duty and silence, thinking they were protecting each other, when all they were doing was denying their own happiness. It took a villain like Crow to force them to realize that the greatest risk wasn't scandal. It was living a life without the person who holds your heart. They broke every rule of the ton, but they built a life that was real. What about you? Could you have waited 10 years for the person you loved, or would you have given up? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of secret love and dramatic rescues, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a romance that makes your heart race. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.